and welcome to episode number 56 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam.
I'm Sahil.
And Nomar Mazara is no longer on a roster. It finally happened. What are your thoughts?
Thank God. I'm surprised. So Cam and I have been talking like all day before we recorded this, and then hopped on to Zoom like 45 minutes before we started recording this. And I'm surprised that neither of us mentioned Nomar Mazara. I'm a little embarrassed because I was super excited for it. He should not have been on a roster for like over a year now. And I'm very happy that Andrew kind of came to his senses and is now using that roster spot for something more useful. And strangely, and we'll get to this in a minute, but strangely, that's something more useful is Adam Duvall, who I also shit on. So what a world. It was
it was Andrew claimed to have a really tough roster cut. We both disagreed. And we're gonna this episode, once we go through the trades, that's gonna be our big story, is talking about all the roster cuts that were made, and some players who were maybe surprising, and some teams that had the toughest roster crunches. Andrew seemed to think he had one of the toughest roster crunches. I'm not sure if that was if he was saying that fully seriously or not. It was, looking at his team, it was a little bit tough to see too many cuttable guys, I guess. But I mean, he got rid of Mazara, which, yeah, good for him. Took him long enough.
Good for the league. I mean, it was up there with the day I won the championship in terms of best days in league history, in my opinion.
Well, that's just your opinion, because I don't think either of those are any of my favorite days.
My opinion is always the right opinion. But
well, anyway.
That's a good transition.
Good transition. It's hard to get a good transition out of my opinion is always the right one, but we're trying. Yeah, there were quite a few trades made this week.
Mostly by me.
Yeah, mostly by you.
Yeah.
Before that, though, we want to talk about a trade that was made 1 year ago yesterday at the time of recording. This was the famous Tatis trade, the trade that sent Tatis to you. Do you want to just kind of recap, first of all, who was involved in it? There were a lot of conditions, and then kind of talk about how you're feeling about it a year later.
Yeah, I think the Tatis deal, I mean, I still think in terms of all the conditions and everything, I still think it's the craziest deal in league history. I agreed to trade Trevor Story, Jose Barrios, my 2021 first round pick, Eric's 2021 second round pick, the 2025 first round pick, 2025 second round pick, a future first, which actually ended up being a 2025 first round pick again from the Heriberto deal, and a future second to EBO for Fernando Tatis Jr. and Giovanni Gallegos. EBO, I still owed him a top 18 protected pick. If Tatis wins the MVP in the next 5 seasons, I have to send the earliest available first and second to EBO, and ditto for me if Trevor Story wins the MVP. I still love this trade. I mean, for Fernando Tatis was like a top 5 fantasy player all season. I mean, I think you could argue even maybe a little better than that. I think, despite the injuries, and I am concerned a bit that he's not getting the shoulder surgery, but I made the trade because I thought I needed a big, young kind of star player like you have with Soto and Vlad, and Eric now has with Wander to really compete, and I got him. Trevor Story had a down year, and it's interesting now. We'll transition to this in a second, but Zane's been Trevor Story among others on the block, so we'll see what happens there. I mean, he still was a 6-rated shortstop on the player rater, but he definitely disappointed a bit this year, and he will be leaving Coors Field. Jose Barrios had a fantastic year, and Zane turned out into Bobby Witt Jr. So if Bobby Witt is as advertised, and I've talked to Zane, and he really wants to build what he dubs EBO 3.0 with Bobby Witt Jr. as the face of the team, that could be really good. The 2021 first actually went back to me and became Pete Crow Armstrong as a side note. And also shout out to Giovanni Gallegos, kind of a throw in at the end, because Zane had already promised me that he'd throw a reliever in, and he ended up being the best holds guy in our awards, him and Trinan. So very interesting deal. Actually, I'm sorry to include another trade here, but yesterday was also the 1-year anniversary of this deal. EBO sent Yordan Alvarez and Michael Brantley to both the flow for Blake Snell, Alex Verdugo, David Dahl, your 2022 second, and both the flow's 2023 third.
Oh, big day for EBO trades.
Yeah, wow. I'm not going to go through all of that, but damn. 2 days later, they traded Barrios for Witt. They also traded away Strasburg on the day to get Rhys Hoskins. It was a pretty big week for EBO this time last year.
It was. I remember it pretty well. And yeah, especially that Tatis trade. It's going to be really interesting going forward. And I am kind of concerned about Tatis's health. Just looking down the line here, just with his injuries and with his refusal to get surgery on them. Who knows what the right decision is. But yeah, let's talk about EBO 3.0. I like that name for it. And Zane is maybe committing to a rebuild. What's going on with him? You're the one who talked to him. So kind of what's Zane thinking right now?
Yeah, I'll be all Ken Rosenthal like here. My sources say that EBO is going to rebuild. I think it's interesting because I think Zane kind of went from, we're going to rebuild to very briefly, no, we're not. And I think he's kind of back on that rebuild kind of, thought. And I think, earlier today he put out hey, anybody who's on the bench in my roster is available in trades. And I have since confirmed by talking to him about some of these players. And these are mostly older names. So Starling Marte, is going to be 33. Trevor Story is about to turn 30 in short order. Charlie Blackmon, DJ LeMahieu, Nelson Cruz, Joey Votto, Mike Yastrzemski, Paul Goldschmidt. And now on the pitching side, for the most part, he's just put some relievers on the block that have had some interesting seasons in the past, including, Ryan Presley, Mark Melanson. Although I don't know if he's going to close the next place he is. Garrett Crochet was a second round pick in this past year's fantasy draft. So there's some interesting names he's put on the block. And we went from EVO dropping out of the league to all of a sudden EVO might have the most active offseason. Like, these are a lot of really good players that could help a lot of teams.
Yeah, no, they are, and it's weird, I mean, just EBO committing to a rebuild, possibly. I mean, looking at Trevor Story, I know we've both reached out about the price for him. I haven't heard anything specific, but maybe we'll know something between now and when the podcast is dropped.
Yeah.
But other than that, there are a lot of interesting players on this team. I agree, it's an old team, so maybe a rebuild is a good thing to do, especially since they were kind of disappointing this year. But it's kind of fun, to see Zane lean into this. I feel like he would have a lot of fun rebuilding a team from scratch. Bobby Witt Jr. could be a good guy to build around, even if he's not maybe the generational type of talent that Acuna, Soto, Vlad, Tatis are. Franco, of course. So I guess we'll see, but he already has guys like Trey Turner, who I imagine he's not giving up.
No, he's a keeper.
Yeah, he is.
So Mookie Betts too.
Mookie Betts keeper or on the block?
Keeper.
Okay, makes sense.
I mean,
I'm sure he could get an absolute haul for Mookie Betts, but I'd be surprised to see him trade him.
No, I mean, but I could also on the flip side see Trey Turner and Mookie Betts as the cornerstones of his next winning team pretty easily.
That's true too. And I can't imagine he would commit to like a 6-year rebuild either. It'd be a couple of years. And I don't think we've ever. When was the last time we saw a team announce that they're rebuilding from a team that could maybe be a fringy team, decide that they're committing to a rebuild, and then follow through with that? Have we ever? I mean, maybe my team at the end of the first season.
Yeah, I think yours is the closest. I think, well, we've only had 4 full seasons in the league. So I feel like up until this point, and we're starting to see that shift, i.e. with Connor, where it's like some of the teams who kind of drafted that from the beginning or didn't really make that push in the first season to kind of compete are kind of on a trajectory now where they're kind of slowly building up. And then you're seeing teams like EBO now who were kind of at the top and they're kind of slowly going down, or even like Yuki's team who made the playoffs 2 of the first 3 years is kind of now in the downswing. So I think this was one you're now just going to start seeing these shifts. And now for some teams, I think like me and Eric, for example, I think we've, been competitive and we intend to stay competitive. But I think a lot of these other teams might, start to enter different directions. And I think what's interesting is I feel like EBO kind of had a dual strategy last year where, as we mentioned, they acquired a lot of these older bats to go with the relievers. It was what I would kind of call a cheaper strategy to compete because relievers aren't as expensive as starters and these older bats weren't as expensive as it was, say, for me to go get Tatis last offseason. But they were able to maintain quite a bit of draft capital and prospects. So they have 2 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, and 2 third-round picks this year. That's the most picks in the league. And they have 2 firsts, 4 seconds, and 3 thirds next year, which is also the most. So
yeah, they have 14 second-rounders over the next 5 years.
Right. And then in their farm system, it's Shane Baz, Jaron Duran, Bobby Witt Jr., Jordan Groshans, Garrett Mitchell, Jordan Adams, Jordan Walker, Zach Veen, Austin Hendrick. It's not the best farm system, but there's a lot of really good names there. And
I think, honestly, if Zane fully commits to a rebuild and he fully commits to keeping his interest level up in the league while he's rebuilding and remaining active throughout the whole time, he could, in 2024, 2025, be where my team is now, and perhaps Eric or you will be on the downswing at that point, and he could kind of be building a dynasty within a couple of years if he commits to a rebuild and all that.
Oh, I think so. And honestly, I think it's a better strategy than doubling down right now and just trading for a bunch of players to compete, because I don't think the bullpen strategy worked. And,
I think it's impossible to say whether it worked or not, really, because the ties are super weird.
Yeah, I guess that, and then his lack of activity, had he been, making moves at the trade deadline, maybe it would have been a little different. But let's put it this way. I think the bullpen strategy can work. We've debated this question a million times, but I think the bullpen strategy can work, but I think he just needs to do it differently than he did this year. But I don't want to go into that again. We've talked. Yeah,
we have talked about this a ton. But the point is, it's kind of interesting to see them rebuild. I think they could crush a rebuild if Zane remains active throughout the process. And the teams that have rebuilt, Andrew has committed to a rebuild, but his team was really bad when he got it. Connor compiled a bunch of prospects, but his team was really bad when he got it. And I guess the only thing mildly similar was what me and Duncan did in our first season, and maybe our second season too, where we decided that our team was fine but not great, and fully leaned into the skid, I guess you could say, to build the team up, and that worked really well for us. And EBO is in a better position now than we were then, so I could see this team really going places.
Absolutely. And, it may just take the form more of a retool rather than a rebuild. explicitly, because I do think they have a lot of the pieces right now, as he said, Turner and Betts, and Semien was interestingly under keeper's list, but I don't know if, maybe I think you could argue now's the time to sell him, but Kirilloff too, Rendon, a couple other guys. We'll see.
That's true, but I mean, my team, we kept Bryant the whole time. We built around him, and we even in our terrible 2018 season, we traded for Trevor Bauer, which I mean, for 1 year was good. So there's still, so I guess even the big rebuilds are still retools in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on whether or not you have that. I think it's about getting value. If you feel like you can get value in a deal while you're making the rebuild, then I think you should go for it. And I think that that's the difference between some of these teams that have been rebuilding for longer and teams who have, kind of seen the opportunity and just went for it. And I think that's what you did, and I think that's what EBO can do.
But yeah, so we've been talking for a while, and we haven't even talked about any of the trades yet. What is the first trade you want to talk about that's happened at this roster crunch deadline?
Yeah, so there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 7 trades made. One of them was a 3-team trade. 6 of the trades involved me. And I think we should start from the beginning. We're going to pair these off a little differently, but the first one I want to talk about was a trade on November 4th. The Big League Yell Champs has agreed to trade Dansby Swanson and Andrew's 2022 third-round pick, which is the 27th overall pick, to the Crone Zone for Ruth Vick and Nick's 2022 first-round pick. That was 6th overall. Jake and Clayton's 2022 third-round pick, 30th overall, and Anthony's 2022 third-round pick, 31st overall. Since it was my trade, obviously I'll talk about it from my perspective. I had quite the roster crunch. I think I had 36 guys on my roster at the end of the season, including a couple guys I picked up after the season ended, i.e. Zach Greinke, Harrison Bader, Gio Urshela. And I traded for Dansby Swanson thinking that he'd be a bit better than he was. He slumped really badly down the stretch. I was concerned about Tatis's shoulder at the time and thought it would be good to get some shortstop depth. Just didn't really pan out. And I thought he was a little redundant on my roster. So I think getting the lottery first round pick was kind of a no-brainer. I think Swanson's in his prime or entering his prime. I don't know if the upside is, super high. He had like a sub 320 OBP this year, it wasn't fantastic. I think he can be a 30 homer, 12 stolen base, like 340 OBP guy, but I didn't have the roster space. I was happy for the pick. And I think Andrew gets a nice, piece at shortstop. He was only 27 years old. Andrew has another first round pick. He has a 2nd overall pick. So, maybe he thought, he was willing to trade the later of those 2 picks to maybe make an upgrade to his major league roster now and maybe start to think about competing a little bit. So that's my thoughts. What did you think?
Yeah, so I think your initial Swanson trade really did not end up panning out for you. I was a little bit worried about it, although kind of thinking you didn't give up a ton, so it was probably fine. Yeah, Swanson, but either way, he kind of sucked when he was on your team. But you were able to get a decent return for him. This trade in itself didn't end up mattering, except for in the sense that you got other pieces from it. And I guess for me, the fact that you traded away Swanson kind of derailed a lot of our Carlos Correa talks that we were having. So that was a little bit of a bummer for me.
I don't know how serious I really was about moving Correa in the first place. I was at
the
talks, but yeah, I didn't realistically. Swanson was the one I was going to move all along. Correa had a really.
That's true. Yeah, and you were going to cut him anyway for the most part. So it's
I wouldn't have cut him if I wasn't able to trade him. I think there are players I would have cut. I see the upside in Swanson more than say like Kevin Biggio or Sean Murphy at the time.
Interesting.
I think one of those would have been cut first.
But the second trade was also made by you, and you traded Harrison Bader, who I guess you can speak to whether or not you would have cut him anyway. You received, you received a second from EBO that ended up going directly to Jake and Clayton as per the terms of your Michael Brantley trade. So this was pretty simple trade. We don't need to spend a ton of time on it. But Bader, you were going to cut anyway?
Yeah, I was going to cut Bader anyway, but I thought Bader had a really nice second half. He's only going to be 27. He kind of fits what EBO wants in a rebuild. I think his value could go up. And, there were a couple of players I traded for second-round picks last offseason that I wouldn't say ended up coming back to bite me given what I did with some of those picks, but ended up having a lot more value than the second-round pick they were giving up for. And I think Bader could be one of those guys. So I think it's a nice pickup for EBO. And I think it was nice for me because I probably would have cut him and I was able to fulfill one of those conditions because Lord knows I have so many picks that need to, go to other teams still. We've talked about some of those conditions already. So that's all I have.
That's true. I mean, you're putting yourself in debt in terms of draft picks. You're really, hoping that you can acquire picks later just to pay off your debts. That's kind of an interesting spot to be in. And and I don't really envy you there.
Well, at this point, I owe a top 18 pick to EBO. The top 18 meaning like a pick between 13 and 18 in the second round. And other than that, it's just, the first and second round picks that could potentially come from Tatis winning the MVP or an M-SABR a first and second round pick if Story wins the MVP. There's no other conditional picks that are really out there. I made it a point at the beginning of last offseason when we made when I made that trade with him to fulfill the first round pick trade conditions as quickly as possible. And sure enough, like 9 days later, I, made the Heriberto deal and fulfilled the first round condition I owed them. So, I think it's worked out. I think as long as you have a plan to really attack it and repay those, and, I feel like I do a good job of trading generally, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but if I had like 5 first round picks outstanding right now, I'd be in trouble. But that's not the case.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel about trades like that in general though. And I would think strongly about a rule outlawing trades putting yourself in draft pick debt, I guess, because it kind of affects all sorts of other trades that you're making and all that. And I trust you not to be nefarious with it or anything, but it's kind of a weird position to be in.
Yeah, well, I think think about it this way. If a team is willing to put themselves in that position, if you're the other team making that trade, you could be like, so if you're looking from EBO's perspective last year, for an example, and making the Tatis deal, one of the selling points I made with Zane was like, hey, even though you are giving up Tatis, right? This is a really good piece. I get that. You are hamstringing me moving forward by pretty much siphoning off any of these picks that I would acquire, and you are affecting my ability to trade. And I was willing to understand the risks and be like, hey, I am making this harder for myself, but I'm going to accept this challenge. One, because I just love trading and I love the challenge. But number 2, because I think Tatis is worth it. And I think that, that's not necessarily, the worst thing to do. I think one of the things I like about this league is how creative we could be in constructing trades. And, I think it's worked out pretty nicely. And really, that's the one big trade with big conditions where it was trading away future first round picks. Any of these other trades that have been like that have been the AJ Pollock deal, the conditional war third round pick. We have a condition on Sean Murphy, which we'll get into in a minute. It's something substantial.
Yeah, war-based conditional picks are different than picks that you don't own yet. But it is, I do like the creativity of the league, of course. We have in our back pockets a couple of creative trades that haven't happened yet, that we're kind of saving for, I guess, break glass in case of emergency.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's very true. either way, I think it's an improvement over, some of the trades you're making the first season where, we're just trading a player for a player, I do like this added creativity.
Yeah, I remember how my mind was blown for the first draft pick trade. I mean, most trades involve draft picks now. So it's kind of, I mean, I specifically said after the first draft pick trade, this is something along the lines of, this is crazy. What's next? Trading waiver order. And that hasn't happened yet, but there's a lot still left out there. And it is fun to be creative with it.
Remember when we made a 3-team deal with like 16 players and there's no draft picks?
That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't think anything like that would ever happen again. And it's funny that we saw the inverse of that last offseason with the Heriberto deal, which is basically all picks and Heriberto and I think one more prospect, Brewers outfielder, I'm blanking on his name.
Tristan Lutz.
Yeah. So quick aside, do you remember what the first draft pick trade was?
Was it? I believe it involved Connor's 2019 first, right?
Nope. It was Walk It Like I Bought It has agreed to trade Alex Kirilloff, Kristen Stewart, and Sean Murphy to Panic at the Frisco for Kyle's first round draft pick. That draft pick ended up being the second overall pick. And that pick was Casey Mize.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember there being a scramble around Connor's pick being traded a bunch, thinking, okay, this is Casey Mize, but Kyle's pick ended up being Casey Mize.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, because Connor won a Madrigal. Because I remember, so a day later, Eric traded his first round pick and Kyle's first round pick to Connor for his first round pick. So that was like 1 for 2 and
12.
Yeah. And then you got Connor's first round pick.
Yeah, I had it for a little bit.
Yeah, and then EBO got that pick. And the Brendan Rodgers, Marco Gonzalez, Blake Parker, Nathan Eovaldi, Danny Jansen, and EBO's first and second round picks to you for Connor's first round pick, John Lester, Ben Zobrist, and Chris Davinsky.
Ugh, every single piece in that trade just kind of aged poorly, huh?
Yeah, I mean, Nathan Eovaldi's still kicking it. Like, and he's doing all right, but yeah, I mean, man, like,
yeah, I mean, Eovaldi, but I think Eovaldi in the long term, I mean, he had a phenomenal season this year, but I mean, was he cut? I'm pretty sure he's been on waivers in between then and now.
Yeah, oh yeah, he definitely has been. He's on Anthony's roster now, but yeah, he's definitely been. I think at least I think he's been like on and off with waivers because he had the injury there, and when he was in Tampa, like I don't think he was started off the strongest. I'd have to look closely at that,
but yeah. Anyway, let's go into the next trade that was made, and this was kind of an interesting one. You traded Diego Cartaya, Ezekiel Tovar, Ruthvik and Nick's 2022 first, which is pick number 6. And then Clayton and Jake's 2022 third, which is pick number 30. Yep. And you sent that to Connor for Luis Patiño and Sahil's 2022 first. Sahil is you, and your pick is number 10. And yeah, so essentially, I guess since I'm talking right now, I'll talk about how I at first did not like this trade for you at all. And I know this, I guess we don't need to dwell on this too much since it kind of ended up building into a couple other trades for you, but I thought you gave up way too much for Luis Patiño. I thought Luis Patiño is fine. He was a former top prospect. He's been okay in the majors, but is he really the type of guy that you want to give up a bunch for? And does he fit on your roster? And I guess I've learned a few things since then that make me think, oh, he's not going to stay on your roster. But so you traded back from 6 to 10, and you also gave up Diego Cartaya, who's a really solid prospect, and Ezekiel Tovar, I don't know much about. But that trading back from 6 to 10 is significant because even in your own words, you said that there's a huge drop off in the draft after 6, and I tend to agree with you. The top 6 prospects are really solid, and then once you get to 7, there's kind of, do you take Colton Cowser? Do you take Jackson Joby? What do you do here? So kind of trading out of that 6 spot kind of takes a lot of your freedom away in the draft. But anyway, I've said what I think. Why don't you talk about your rationale for this trade and then what it became?
Yeah, it's interesting you say freedom to the draft because I went from a position where I had a lottery draft pick and a lot of 3rd round picks and like thought I could be in a position to, for the 2nd consecutive years, make the most picks in a draft. And all I have left to show is 29 and 32. So not really a lot of freedom in the draft, but there's one thing I told you yesterday that I think, you should know by now. If I make a trade that doesn't feel like it passes the smell test for you in terms of like what I usually do, if it kind of smells funny, not really his MO, it's probably because there's something else in play. And I think I did a lot of research on Luis Patiño, and I do think that he could potentially be a very good guy for my rotation. I mean, Fangraphs had him at 12th going into the year. I think a lot of these prospects, they debut, and sometimes it's not like the most perfect debut, and everybody's just ready to jump off. But as we've seen with guys like Corbin Burns, Logan Webb, development is not linear. I like to trust the pedigree in some of these guys and, see if they can, potentially become something. I've talked about improving the farm. While this isn't directly improving my farm system itself, Patiño is a young enough guy where, he could really be, cornerstone of my rotation for years to come. He was the 3rd youngest player in Major League Baseball this year that got significant playing time behind Wander Franco and Ryan Weathers. So there's plenty of time to develop. And I think Fangraphs actually, their write-up for him before the season summed it up. They're like, look, he's the same age as a lot of these college guys that's coming out. He's younger than Henry Davis, who was the number 1 overall pick. And they're like, if he was at UCLA right now, he'd be the 1st overall pick. And I'd imagine he'd be picked even higher than 6 in our rookie draft. So to drop from 6 to 10 to get a guy who was ranked as a consensus top 25 prospect and giving up a guy who I think is going to rise and probably be maybe in that 50 to 100 prospect range, I thought was a pretty good value opportunity for me. And, let's be honest, I think there's a pretty decent chance that Patiño's out of my roster, very shortly. Who knows, maybe even by the time this episode comes out, because I am talking Patiño trades.
Interesting.
Yeah. But, for me, it's all about value and it's all about extracting the most trade value. And I think a guy like Patiño carries more weight in trade talks than the 6th pick did, or than Diego Cartaya did, or that the 10th pick will. And I think it's already proven itself. And I also think, and this dovetails into the next trade here, I thought one of my big goals this offseason was to upgrade a catcher. I did a year of the Sean Murphy experiment, and it made me want to just bang my head into the wall every time I saw him in July and August being benched for Yan Gomes, or, seeing him go 0 for 4. So I was ready to upgrade a catcher. I've been ready to do this for a while. The Sal Perez, efforts this offseason are well chronicled. I'm not going to repeat that. But I wasn't comfortable trading a 6th overall pick to get a catcher, unless it was like a Will Smith or maybe like a real Muto. Because I didn't think that it was valued. I didn't think any of those catchers were at that value. But the 10th overall pick I thought was a great value for a lot of these catchers. I floated out an offer yesterday to Andrew after I made the Patiño deal. That was like, hey, what about maybe like Kyber Ruiz for 10 and 27, or Kyber Ruiz in 27 for 10, thinking that, I could stash Kyber on my minor league team for a bit longer, see how Murphy started the season, and then make a decision on one of the two in like May. as it ended up, EBO needed to make roster cuts. Once he realized he did around like 8 o'clock, I was like, hey, if you need some help making roster cuts, let me know. I was like happy to make a trade. I offered him 10 for Contreras. He's like at 31. And then, we added the conditional second round pick. So it ended up being 10, 31, and a conditional second for Wilson Contreras, with the condition being if Contreras finishes among the top 2 catchers in the player rater in 2021, I'll send my next second to EBO, which I'm more than happy to do if Contreras is that good. I think Contreras just solidifies my catcher position. I mean, in terms of catchers who I think are going to get substantial playing time in the majors this year, I think he's somewhere in that top 4. I think between him, Will Smith, JT Realmuto, and Sal Perez, order them however you want. I think he's one of the top 4 catchers. I don't need to think about the catcher position the rest of the offseason or for the next few seasons, and I'm just incredibly happy. I thought I got a good value. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was a great value for Contreras. I probably would have paid a lot more for Contreras than that. Honestly, I've made no secret about how much I like him. In 2020, I voted him as the best catcher in the league in our awards voting. I told you I think he's the second or third best catcher in the league. And I think, you did a great job to get him. And I'm wondering where EBO is going to go, because they currently do not have a catcher on their roster or in their farm system. Maybe they pick up Christian Vasquez. No, they dropped Christian Vasquez. Why would they pick him back up?
I think they dropped Vasquez right before the trade, and I thought about offering him Sean Murphy, but I think he just really needed to make a cut, so I didn't include Sean Murphy in the deal.
Yeah, no, I'm surprised. Maybe they pick Vasquez back up. I was very high on Vasquez going into the year. He kind of had a disappointing season. Maybe they pick up Yachty. Travis d'Arnaud is a free agent as well.
They've had both of those guys before. I think they could be pickups.
Yeah, or maybe they make a trade for someone. I don't know. Maybe they, I don't know. I'm sure they can find some sort of catcher somewhere, because right now they just have nobody. But as for you, I think Contreras was a great get, and that leads into the next trade that was made after that, which is a lot of fun. It was a 3-team deal where all 3 teams got catchers. It was made between you, Ruthvik, and myself. And I'll set the stage, since I'm kind of the one who set it up, essentially, who kind of made it what it is. So you kind of said, you reached out to me about Sean Murphy. I asked what the price was. You said that it would take pick 32 and then a conditional pick, which I was like, you know what? I would trade that for Sean Murphy. I like Sean Murphy. I know he had a disappointing season, but I think he can bounce back. So I went and shopped around Carson Kelly. I sent a DM to Yuki, and I sent a DM to Ruthvik. And then I also sent a chat in the main Dynasty Baseball chat about Carson Kelly. Ruthvik responded, and he said I kind of asked him about pick 34 and then a future third, which ended up falling out of the deal. But he was definitely interested in that future third as long as he cut someone. I said, hey, I'll take Travis d'Arnaud. Sure, I'll just cut him anyway. Because essentially at this point, I'm trading 2 spots back for a catcher I like a little bit better. And really, the difference between 32 and 34 with my track record in the draft, I don't think whoever I want at 32 is going to be gone at 34, really. And if so, it's not that much of a difference. So that's kind of what I was thinking at the time. And then I thought, wait a minute, why not make this a 3-team deal? That would be a lot of fun. And my first thought was, what if we made it a secret 3-team deal? If I told Ruthvik and I told you, hey, there's going to be a 3-team deal. It's going to be a secret. What do you think? And then just kind of pasted it together at the end in the chat. And it was a surprise to both of you. And Ruthvik was on board. You were not, because you wanted to be the one to announce the deal. So that part of it kind of fell through. But in the end, we still made it a 3-team deal. And as part to kind of make it more of a 3-team deal instead of two 2-team deals, I decided, hey, let's send d'Arnaud to you. since he's just going to get cut by one of us, might as well have Ruthvik send a player to you. So that worked. That worked out. And in the end, it's a 3-team deal. Each team gets a catcher. That's a lot of fun. We kind of negotiated our condition, and it ended up being that if Sean Murphy is a top 5 catcher in the player rater, I'll send you your 2023 third, which is fine. I don't really care about that pick that much anyway. I've got a lot of thirds coming up. And if Sean Murphy's a top 5 catcher, that's more than fine. And I really think this deal works really well for all 3 teams. From Ruthvik's perspective, he needed to cut a catcher. I think he gets a little bit of a boost at catcher, and all that it costs him is pick number 34. As for me, I also get a boost at catcher. I think Sean Murphy is going to have a bounce back season. All it cost me was moving back 2 spots, and if he doesn't have a bounce back season, then I just cut my losses. Call up Adley once the time is ready. If he's not ready, then I can play the waiver wire at catcher. I've done that before. And if you want to talk about your perspective in the deal and kind of how it all went down for you and what you think, I guess, is the benefit for your team. I know you need to cut someone anyway, so that works out well for you.
Yeah. First off, I'll just be a lesson to everyone. I don't think I've made a trade in years where I haven't announced it in this league. So I'm keeping that up. But with respect to the trade itself, after I made that Contreras deal, there's kind of a rush for me to trade Sean Murphy because like otherwise he's just going to get cut. I offered him to you initially and you were like, no. And then we kind of talked about him a bit more. And then you're like, what was the price? And interestingly enough, when I said 32 in a conditional third, I think you thought that was what I offered to another team and not you, not realizing that you were the one who owned 32. So I thought that was a little funny.
Yeah, I don't really know pick numbers outside of the first round.
No, it's all good. I've been dealing with like these 3rd round picks like all day. So I was like kind of had them in my head. It was funny because like I was at to set even more context, I was like at a bar negotiating this and people thought I was crazy. They were like, why the hell are you
No, you weren't negotiating. What you said to me, you were negotiationing. You are a lawyer, sir. You should know that word.
I was typing really fast and trying to get it because there was literally someone in front of me. They're like, hey, do you want to be social and join the conversation? And I'm like, give me a second. I was like trying to switch between watching the Ravens game on my phone because UNC was playing football and I was on the TVs in the bar and doing that. Ended up being more social later in the night, don't worry. You know, I realized I didn't have a lot of leverage here because he was going to get cut. In actuality, if you gave me like a week to do this, like before the cut down deadline or even like a couple days, I think I could have gotten like a 2nd round pick for Sean Murphy. I think that's about what his value is. And I think that there is significant upside for you because I do think he'll bounce back to some degree. He was really good in limited playing time in 2019 and 2020. Now, and I bought in 2020 because he had a 17% walk rate in the shortened season that, you know, he wasn't able to keep up. But I think what concerned me a bit was that the A's didn't really show the trust in him by getting Yan Gomes and kind of having Yan Gomes take over as a starter. Now, Sean Murphy won the AL Gold Glove, and I think he's going to get more opportunities because the A's are tearing it down, and he's young and he's cheap. But I wasn't ready to roll the dice on him again, and he was going to get cut. So I like this for you. I don't get why Ruthvik gave up a 2nd round pick to get Travis d'Arnaud before the trade deadline in the first place. Or sorry, he gave up Drew Waters. Still, I don't get why he gave up Drew Waters. But I think Carson Kelly for a 3rd round pick is kind of a no-brainer for him. Like Carson Kelly is, when healthy, I think he's a pretty solid catcher. I don't know what his exact numbers were this year. And honestly, I don't know who's the better option between Carson Kelly and Sean Murphy. I think Carson Kelly certainly had the better season with a 343 OBP, 13 homers, 46 ribbies. But, you know, I think Sean Murphy might have a little more upside.
I think he does. And really for me, I want upside because I have my catcher of the future already. I'm just hoping and at the catcher position in the 2022 season, there's really it's not a huge deal if a guy's performing slightly better, but with worse upside for the first 3 months of the year. But if Sean Murphy really breaks out, which I think he can, then that's huge for my team, and I can trade him, or I can even hold on to him, for however long I can.
I think he has top 5 catcher upside.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he hits it, but even if he turns into a top 10 catcher, that's a starter in this league. Somebody's going to need a catcher. And it's kind of interesting now. We were talking about this earlier, that the solid young catchers are kind of concentrated on like 3 or 4 teams in this league. Andrew still has Kyber Ruiz and Tyler Stevenson behind Will Smith. And he also has Francisco Alvarez, really highly regarded prospect. You have Adley, Rutschman, Tyler Soderstrom, who is really good, I think really underrated, Sean Murphy and Corey Lee. Connor has Diego Cartaya and Joey Bart behind Sal Perez. And, we all know about Yuki and his catchers. I don't think this is the last that we'll see the catcher carousel this offseason.
I agree. I mean, I could see some movement. I could see Yuki making some moves. I could see what I could see is Connor trading away Joey Bart. And this was, maybe I'm stealing your thunder because this was you who came up with this thought, but I am the one talking right now.
Go for it. You got my permission.
Yeah, I think that deal would make a lot of sense for Connor to trade him to, I'll continue stealing your thunder and say EBO because that's who you said.
Yep.
That deal would make a lot of sense because Connor's already got Sal Perez. He doesn't need Joey Bart. Joey Bart's going to lose prospect eligibility pretty soon, assuming he gets, say, 300 plate appearances for the Giants this coming year, which I think he will. And then EBO needs a catcher, and they need a young anything right now is what they're looking for. They could trade someone to him. Maybe they can even trade a star to him, and Connor could give something else up in addition. I don't know what that would be, maybe a prospect. But I think there's certainly a match here, and they got to come up with something.
No, I think so too. I think it just makes a lot of sense. And I think if it's not Joe, so you didn't steal my thunder and who I suggested they send back to Connor, which was, I thought a Joey Bart for DJ LeMahieu deal makes a ton of sense. Because I think there's some questions with Bart, with his bat, the way it's performed, and, just some concerns about his defense. Maybe some of the pitchers don't like to throw to him as much, and maybe some rumblings that like Kurt Casale could low-key steal some more playing time from Bart than people think. And then LeMahieu, you have the questions of he had a bit of a down year, but he does have tri-eligibility and was really good in a couple of seasons before that. I think that, maybe that could be a trade. If not that, I mean, Kyber Ruiz and Tyler Stevenson are both going to be, or Tyler Stevenson is already, but Kyber Ruiz is going to lose prospect eligibility soon. I think maybe Andrew could roster 2 of them. I don't think he could be able to roster all 3 of them. And I could see that being a logical target for EBO too, especially because I don't think Andrew's getting out of the rebuild very explicitly per se, but I think he can start being like, hey, I have a couple excess young guys. Maybe I can acquire a guy or 2. And all of a sudden his team's starting to look like what Connor's team was going into last year, as a team that had a lot of potential, but maybe quite wasn't on the, there yet. But yeah.
Andrew would need a better pitching staff for that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but, Andrew's low-key been making some pretty decent trades, and I don't see why he couldn't, build some semblance of a pitching staff.
That's true. He's not going to get that from EBO, though.
No, he's not. But maybe he can get an outfielder from EBO, or because looking at looking at Andrew's outfield right now, Like Brian Reynolds is really good, right? Raimel Tapia, I think, is a solid piece, but like Austin Hayes, Jesus Sanchez, Adolis Garcia. He's got Adam Duvall. I mean, actually, this is a great transition into that deal. We want to talk about that?
Yeah, he acquired Adam Duvall among others. Andrew received
Garcia.
Yeah, he received Adolis Garcia, who named their vest Love super much. But him and Duvall for Victor Robles, which is kind of a big deal. Matt Cantorino, who's kind of a fringe top 100 prospect. And then Connor's 2022 second, which is pick number 23. So what are your thoughts about this deal for both sides?
Yeah. So I got a couple fun facts here if you're ready for some fun facts.
Oh, I'm always ready for fun facts.
Okay. So Victor Robles has been involved in a couple notable deals. Victor Robles was the first ever player I traded away in this league. I traded Victor Robles and Ronaldo Lopez to Connor for Madison Bumgarner and Yuris Familia. And the trade, I think, worked out for me. As I turned Bumgarner into Nola. But Andrew acquired Victor Robles from Connor initially, and that big 16-player deal or 16-player and pick deal that they made last year. So now 13 months later, he's going back to Connor, which I think is really interesting. But history aside, I think Andrew made the mistake when he gave up Adam Duvall for so little in the middle of the season. I'm actually a little surprised that Connor gave him up because I think that Duvall, for all of his flaws, you know how much I hate Duvall. I mean, you can't deny that he's a big run producer. And I think he's like a fourth outfielder, fifth outfielder. That's a really solid asset for Connor. I don't like Adolis Garcia. I think he's useless. It's just he's whatever. I don't really think Robles is going to bounce back. I think Cantorino's solid. Connor's 2022 second will be late. I think the conditions interesting. Garcia and Duvall combined for 50 homers or more in 2022. Andrew will send either his 2024 third or a mutually agreeable 2023 third should Andrew acquire one if and when the condition is met, which I think that will be met. I think they'll combine for 50 home runs. But yeah, this is kind of a mid deal. Like I don't feel strongly about it one way or another, but I think Cotter might have been better off just keeping Duvall. That being said, he did have a roster crunch, so this might have just been a necessity in the first place.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you've maybe gone from underrating Duvall to overrating him a little bit. He's great, but I don't think he's necessarily guaranteed a starting outfield job next year. He drove in a lot of runs, but that's not exactly the most replicable stat there is. I think it's kind of interesting, and I don't see him as he's probably the best player in the deal, even though Robles might be the biggest name, maybe he still has name value. But I don't know. The idea of saying you could have gotten more for Duvall feels a little weird to say.
Okay. Two things. One, who else is starting in the Atlanta outfield other than Acuna if it's not Duvall?
Is Rosario a free agent or is he back?
He's a free agent. Marcelo Ozuna, I don't think is starting the season there.
I think Nick Castellanos is starting the season in the Atlanta outfield.
Ooh, that's bold.
Yeah.
That's a bold prediction. I could see that actually. But let's, as much as I shit on Duvall, and this is just so off brand for me, but let's put some perspective here. Adam Duvall had 113 RBIs last year. It was tied for fourth in the majors with Rafael Devers. He had more RBIs than Vlad, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Manny Machado, Ozzy Albies, Nolan Arenado, Yordan Alvarez, Jose Ramirez, Marcus Semien, Bo Bichette. I'm not going to keep reading this whole list. Only Teoscar Hernandez, Jose Abreu, and Sal Perez had more. And if you're looking at home runs, he was tied for 10th with, again, Rafael Devers and Joey Gallo. He had more than, guys like Pete Alonso, Jose Ramirez, Max Muncy, Bryce Harper, Castellanos, Tyler O'Neill, Giancarlo Stanton, Nolan Arenado, etc. So the 281 OBP is terrible, but 38 homers and 113 RBIs isn't that easy to replace.
Yeah, I mean, he hit more home runs. He hit more home runs than I thought he did. But it's one thing to say this guy has driven in a lot of runs this year. He's had a good season in fantasy, than to say that a player is a big RBI guy, because RBIs, I mean, they're not a great stat. They're fluky. He drove in a lot of runs with the Marlins. I mean, how did that happen? I still don't know who he was driving in other than Jesus Aguilar, I guess. So it's not exactly, I mean, the home runs, it was great to see him have that power, but I'm not sure if I trust him to have more than like 75 RBIs next year, even though he had so many this year.
That's fair. And yeah, I mean, for the record, I don't think he's gonna have 113 again either, but he's had 4 seasons in the majors where he's gotten kind of or 3 seasons in the majors where he's gotten 550 plate appearances or above. In those seasons, 33, 31, 38 homers, 103, 99, 113 RBIs. So
okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's I think he's a 30 homer hitter again, and even if he has like 95 RBIs, I mean, that's pretty solid. Hey, he chipped in 5 stolen bases this year too. Like, I get it with the OBP, he's not good. That's going to be a drag on his value, and he's I don't think he's there's a reason as like he's an okay like 4th or 5th outfielder in somebody's team. I'm not suggesting he's a top 30 outfielder, but I would go look at the outfield rankings like that are being put out for like seasonal leagues right now. Like, the outfield is not a deep position. It gets thin really quickly. There's a lot more platooning in the outfield that's going on than there was even like a decade ago. So I'm not saying I love Duvall, but if the playing time's there, he's going to produce.
Yeah, well, we'll see. And we've talked a lot about him already.
Yeah.
The only other trade that we haven't talked about is your Adam Wainwright trade. Is there anything really worth mentioning here? You got a second rounder for him.
Yeah, I would have kept Adam Wainwright had I not made the Patiño deal, because I think, it's hard to find 200 innings in a 3 ERA, which is what Adam Wainwright did this year. And he did get better as the season went on. I think there are 2 things for me. One, I think it's pretty much known that he's going to retire after this coming season. So it's really a year of value. And don't get me wrong, it's good, but he's only got a year. And then the second thing was that this came with like a 366 FIP and a 7.59 K per 9. Solid numbers, but like okay numbers, but I'm not like super ecstatic about it. And I think there's reason to suggest he may, regress a little bit. And on the flip side, I think, Patiño had more upside. And, by the time this podcast airs, I might have flipped Patiño for a starting pitcher I'm more comfortable with. So I'm just kind of playing more of the dynasty game here. And Andrew's 2023 second round pick, I think is going to be in that top 18 range, which either means, I think I could get some good value for it. Or it just becomes a pick that goes to EBO to solve the condition that I owed them from the Tatis deal. And like Andrew has a 15 or his second round pick this year is 15th overall. If I'm picking 15th overall next year with that pick, I'd be pretty happy. So I think it's a good value, but I did hate giving up Adam Wainwright. So.
But no, tough to give up. But we've been teasing this all episode. This is already a long episode, but let's talk about the roster crunch. A lot of trades were made about that, but some players just couldn't be traded and had to be cut to clear space. And were there any? Is there anyone that you want to start out with, really? But it was particularly surprising.
Yeah, so I think the first one that we put on our list, kind of when we went through, was Zach Greinke. And Greinke's been cut now twice. Eric cut him in the finals because he needed to stream. And then I picked him up and I was like, oh boy. I was like, I don't know if I really have an intention of keeping Greinke, but he's like interesting, could give me a little more flexibility. And I bet you I could trade him. I actually had thoughts that like maybe I could deal him to somebody like Connor to for like a late first round pick or something, just like if he was really aggressive about the win now. But nobody wanted him. And I was kind of surprised, but when you look at his numbers this year, I think he did take a little bit of a step back. He ended the year banged up. He's going to be 38 when the season starts, or he just turned 38. His strikeout rate dropped from 9 to 6.32 this year. The walk rate went up. The homer rate went up. He had a 4.16 ERA, which is similar to his ERA last year, but he did it with a 2.80 FIP last year. This year he had a 4.71 FIP. His highest FIP since in a full season since 2005, which, man, he's been pitching for a while. But I still thought from the name value alone, the fact he's kind of an innings eater, I thought I'd get something for him. But I think he could be a nice pickup for someone to fill out their rotation.
Yeah, I think he could be, or at the very least, he could be like what CC Sabathia was at the end of his career, just kind of a streamer for some teams. Either way, we're going to see him added at some point. But the another guy that we were very surprised about was Chris Flexen. Was cut by the Flexen Bellies, who are going to need to change their name now since they're no longer Flexen. They had to make they made 8 cuts. It was a tough deadline for them. But Flexen, especially him being the centerpiece of a trade you made at the deadline, a trade that we thought that they had already lost, but now that they don't have Flexen anymore, that just really solidifies that.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised they cut him. I thought they had other candidates on their roster that they probably could have cut. It's not like Flexen had a bad year or anything. I mean, Flexen probably should be rostered by a team. He's kind of like Greinke. I think he's a decent back in a rotation starter, but I think he's got a little more upside because he's younger. And when I look,
would you rather have Chris Flexen or Spencer Turnbull long term? Because they held on to Turnbull.
I would say Chris Flexen because Turnbull had Tommy John at the end of July. So Turnbull's not going to pitch next year. So I think somebody's going to pick up Chris Flexen. I don't think somebody's going to pick up Spencer Turnbull. So I'm a little confused by this. I mean, other guys I think they maybe could have cut over him. I mean, Evan Longoria, I don't know if anybody's necessarily going to pick him up. So, I mean, there's a couple others here that maybe, I'd have to think about it more. Danny Delphi, I think I probably would have cut before I cut Chris Flexen.
How about Mitch Keller? Mitch Keller was the top something prospect, top 30 or so prospect. He hasn't done much in the majors. He was awful this year, and maybe they're betting on him bouncing back. The FIP was pretty good, but he walked a lot of guys too. And maybe he has a Corbin Burns-esque breakout next year, but I think he's a guy who maybe could have been cut as well.
Yeah, I think so too. Although, like, for a team that's kind of in the position they're at, like, kind of rebuilding, like, I'd rather hang on to a guy like Mitch Keller as opposed to cut him.
Yep, fair enough.
I mean, the 430 FIP is interesting. He had a 388 BABIP. I mean, he needs to cut down that walk rate of 438, but there's obviously a reason he was a highly ranked prospect. He's a 55 FV on Fangraphs, but for what that's worth. But yeah, that surprised me that they cut Flexen too. All right. What other names did you want to talk about? Do you want me to give one or do you want to give another one?
Yeah, so I'm just going team by team.
Yeah.
Eric didn't really have anyone interesting. Lewin Diaz was cut. He might be picked up at some point, although I guess he's cleared waivers right now and has not been picked up.
Yeah, well, I think like he cut him like early enough in the process when people were still making waiver cut decisions that like I didn't really expect him to get picked up then, but I could see him getting picked up now.
That's true. I mean, yeah, people could still get picked up in the next few days. Connor cut Gavin Sheets, which we were expecting, but he also cut Jordan Hicks. And a lot of relievers were cut, so we don't need to talk about most of them, but Jordan Hicks is definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, Jordan Hicks looked like the closer of the future in St. Louis. And I still think that's very possible he will, because I think they're going to move Alex Reyes to the rotation, or, you know, I think they moved out of the closer's role by the end of the year. It clearly wasn't working out. And I think he could be an upside play for a team like a Yuki, like a Daniel, Greg, and Alex, who are, you know, maybe kind of looking for diamonds in the rough like that, and aren't necessarily competing and can maybe be a little more patient with somebody like him. I think he should be on a roster, and I think it might be closer to spring training where there's kind of discussions about him coming out of, you know, camp, and they're like, hey, you know, he looks pretty good. You know, we're thinking maybe he can be like a top setup guy or maybe even the closer, and then that's what I think people are going to jump on board for him. But I think Connor probably should have kept him, or maybe should have kept him, in my opinion, over like a Hansel Robles. Robles is going to be a free agent. He had a 4.43 ERA and a 1.38 WHIP. It's not like he was one of the top setup guys for Boston. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. You really never know what relievers are going to look like next year, with the exception of the top few. So it's hard to really fault someone. Looking over, looks like my team is the next one listed. I cut Moustakas live on air. But you want to talk about JP Crawford. Why did you want to talk about JP Crawford?
Yeah, JP Crawford, I think he has two things going for him that I really like. One is that the playing time is guaranteed. He's really good defensively. He's a Gold Glove, you know, caliber shortstop. So I don't think there's any chance that they're going to be benching him anytime soon. And they've already talked about the Mariners, like, hey, if we go and sign a guy like a Semien or a Corey Seager, they're not playing shortstop. They're moving over to accommodate Crawford. So I think it speaks to how highly they like him. I get that Crawford might not be the strongest guy when it comes to, you know, producing homers or stolen bases. Let me pull up what he had this year in those categories, but it definitely
he had 9 homers and 3 steals.
Yeah, so in the single digits, but I think a category that people don't look at necessarily enough are runs. You know, he had 89 runs this year. That was 8th in baseball, behind of qualified hitters. So that was ahead of Trevor Story, 1 below Xander Bogaerts, 6 below Tim Anderson. He paired with the 338 OBP, so he's not really a liability there either. And how old is JP Crawford at this point? He can't be that
26, if I had to guess.
Yeah, he turns 27 in January, so he's just like kind of entering his prime here. You know, I think there's maybe even a little more room for growth. And I'm not saying he's a great guy, but I think he's certainly worth, you know, maybe cracking somebody's, you know, bench or like a middle infield spot, a util spot.
Yeah, no, he was definitely the toughest guy on my team to cut, and he had a lot of doubles this past year too. So I think he probably gets picked up. And I do worry about him with my the left side of my infield being kind of thin. But looking back, and this must be a mistake. On May 3rd, I added him. On May 4th, I dropped him. I added him again later on the 4th, dropped him again later on the 4th. Picked him up again on the 13th, cut him on the 14th, picked him up June 1st, cut him on June 4th, picked him up on June 8th one more time, and then he stayed on my team the rest of the year. So maybe a lot of teams haven't realized how good he is. I know Alex and Zach, they were interested in him at various points. We never pulled the trigger. So maybe he'll still be available a few weeks from now. Maybe he continues to fly under the radar. But he's definitely someone worth looking at the very least.
No, I think so too. I don't think people look at runs numbers enough when they're making some of these decisions. And the next thing you know, you look at that category and you're like, hey, I'm not really doing so hot in there. And you're kind of like, why is that? So, I could see him being picked up. Honestly, Alex and Zach might be a good team to pick him up just because, they expressed their desire to improve their infield.
Absolutely. And they reached out about trading for him back near the trade deadline too. But yeah, as for them, they're actually the next team on my list. They cut Jorge Mateo. He's not very interesting.
Oh, I disagree with that strongly.
Oh?
Yeah, because Jorge Mateo, one is he's going to be, let's see what eligibilities he's going to retain, but he was tri-eligible this year. Second short in the outfield. He got some outfield playing time in Baltimore. He's going to, he played 19 games at second and 18 games at short. So he's 1 game and 2 games respectively short of maintaining eligibility there, but he will start the season outfield eligible. But he is going to gain, I think, second and or shortstop eligibility because I think he's mostly going to play the infield for Baltimore. And the thing that keeps drawing me to him, one he did get hurt at the end of the season, so he didn't get a whole lot of playing time, but he has the top prospect pedigree. And he has the...
When was he a top prospect? I don't remember.
With Oakland.
How long ago?
Here's minor league numbers. 2019 in the minors, he had a 19 homer, 24 stolen base season with a 330 OBP. In AAA. And the problem was he wasn't prospect eligible. He hasn't really gotten playing time. So in 2020, he played 22 games with the Padres in the majors. That was his first taste in the majors. But he only had 28 plate appearances. And he was kind of doing something similar in San Diego this year. And finally, they're like, we can't roster him. Like, they really like the talent. They just didn't have the space. And Baltimore is like the first time he's gotten consistent playing time since like 2019, albeit in a small sample because of the injury. I think he's a sleeper. He had 10 stolen bases this year. And, I think that, he still has to prove he can get the OBP up again a bit. That's been a bit of a problem. He doesn't walk a ton. But if he starts a full season in Baltimore, he could get like 30 some stolen bases. And I mean, we know how hard it is to get stolen bases, especially if he has dual eligibility, second base and outfield. I like him.
Interesting. Yeah, this is the first defense I've ever heard of him. I don't expect him to get picked up or anything, but I guess if he, some point in the spring, maybe there will be some interest in him. If he breaks out, that's their loss, but I wouldn't, I don't fault them for cutting him.
Well, I think I would have rather gambled on him than like Tyler Naquin.
Tyler Naquin was great this past year. Are you kidding?
I mean, how old is he now? He's been like a journeyman, I feel like. Okay, so he's 30. He had a 333 OBP, 19 homers, and 5 stolen bases. I guess it's a little better than I thought.
If you had Tyler Naquin, would you trade him for Jorge Mateo?
I think it partially kind of depends on the context of my roster, but I think I would, just because I don't think Tyler Naquin has that high of a ceiling. I'm not that excited about Tyler Naquin, whereas I think Jorge Mateo for the ceiling is something I'd rather keep, especially if I'm a team like Alex and Zach that's kind of rebuilding right now.
I don't know if I fully believe in Jorge Mateo's ceiling, but moving on now to Yuki's team, kind of had an interesting deadline because he cut a catcher and 2 Tampa Bay Rays.
Yeah,
which is kind of the soul of his team. Buster Posey was an easy drop, obviously, because he retired. Pete Fairbanks is a guy that he's shopped a lot. Kind of an easy cut. He's a reliever who didn't have an amazing season. And then Taylor Walls, the prospect, former prospect rather, just barely over his eligibility. And I think he's probably an easy cut also. He did not hit very well. But just kind of an interesting group of players. And then Walls, with him being a recent graduate, could be potentially a sleeper as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say Fairbanks actually had a better fit this year than he did the year before. I mean, I just hate owning Rays relievers because you never know what role they actually have. But like in some respects, Fairbanks arguably had a better season than he did in 2020. But I think you're right; he was an easy cut. Taylor Walls is a little bit interesting to me just because while I think it was the right cut, like that was like Yuki was insistent that I go get Taylor Walls from Daniel and Alex to make the Biggio for Lyle deal last year. I mean, I don't think a lot of people remember that was the third piece in that deal that I sent Yuki's way. You know, I don't think anybody's going to pick him up though. I just think with the depth chart ahead of him, I mean, Wander's there, Brujan's there. Like, they literally traded away Willie Adames because, like, they didn't have the space for him, and he's much better than Taylor Walls. So, yeah, I mean, I think this was a pretty easy cut, but maybe mildly surprising just given how much Yuki liked him.
Anthony's team is the next one listed. He made all of his cuts at 7:24 p.m. on the 7th. It's kind of early. And they're a little interesting. Justin Dunn, starting pitcher with a little bit of upside. He had 50 innings. I was kind of on the Dunn train going into the season. Actually, I held on to him until early May. That's a little surprising. Anthony added him in late July, held on to him until now. He had an okay season. He walked a lot of guys. But he also cut Joey Wensleydale, who he had shopped. He's a multi-position guy who's really interesting, certainly. And he also cut Lorenzo Cain, who had 13 steals, maybe a little bit better season than he had in 2020, although he wasn't his old self or anything. So he cut some interesting guys as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think that it's a huge deal that he cut Lorenzo Cain. I don't think anybody's rushing to pick him up. So I think that was probably fine, even though I think Cain with his stolen bases and okay ability to get on base is probably going to be on and off rosters next year. Wendell surprised me. It's interesting how far he fell from being an all-star this year. I don't think he had that great of a second half, if I remember correctly. But like, I mean, he had a 319 OBP when it was all said and done, 11 homers and 8 stolen bases. The trial eligibility is nice. I don't think he necessarily needs to be rostered. Actually, he'll only retain third and short eligibility next year. He's not going to retain second base eligibility. So only dual eligible next year, but still 2 good positions to be eligible at. But I was surprised he kept Eric Haas over him. Now that Barnhart's there, I don't necessarily think that Haas is going to be able to get a lot of playing time at catcher, especially because I think Barnhart's going to be the clear better defensive catcher. And I think the Tigers are going to have enough solid outfield bats, or I don't think he's going to get a lot of playing time there. And he was this 29-year-old journeyman that just kind of came out of nowhere. So I don't know why Eric Haas is necessarily still on his roster, especially with Yasmani Grandal at catcher for him, who I've inquired on, and he doesn't seem that interested in trading. So that was really the only thing that surprised me. I don't really think Justin Todd's all that good, so I'm not really torn up that he cut him. I don't think anybody's rushing to pick him up.
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely true. And Wendell could even, he's the type of guy, I mean, with that shortened third eligibility, if I had a spot for him, I'd certainly add him. Looking to Andrew, none of his drops. His only drop was Mazara. We've talked about him.
Thank God.
Ruth, Vic, and Nick. We were I'm not sure if this was on air or off air. We were shocked that he didn't cut Willie Calhoun. He did cut a few interesting guys, notably Nick Anderson, who was just kind of his guy. He's said he was one of the top relievers in the league, had a massive fall from grace in 2020 and 2021. Jeff McNeil, who had a not great year either, but he's still a decent name. And I could just kind of surprising to see him on waivers, especially with Ruthvik being a Mets fan. And Matt Boyd, who, I mean, he was a guy that Ruthvik was counting on going into the season. And he was, I mean, he wasn't great, but he was better than some of us thought he would be. And especially the first couple of months of the season, he was legitimately good. So Ruthvik had a few surprising cuts here. What do you think? I know you've always got thoughts about Boyd and Anderson.
Yeah, let's start with Boyd. Boyd, I think, made sense to cut because he's hurt. He had surgery in late September to repair a flexor tendon in his arm. He missed half of 2021 kind of with the shoulder strain. So I don't necessarily know if he's going to start the season healthy next year. So I think that made sense as a cut. Although, you know, I don't like Boyd. I think I've made that pretty well known. But like, you know, when he's been healthy this year, I think he did. How did he do? He was all right when he was healthy this year. So, you know, good for him. But I think with Nick Anderson, I just like to remember when Ruthvik called him a top 60 dynasty asset. And when I hypothetically offered him Matt Chapman for Nick Anderson, he said no way he would do that. And I get that now Matt Chapman is coming off a pretty down year, but like he was coming off a good year at the time. And also like just that's a lesson here that you never value a reliever that high, especially in a dynasty league. Because as we've seen with you and me, a lot of these winning teams, we've been able to kind of build bullpens on the fly during the season and not overpay for last year's guys that were good. I am a bit surprised that he cut him just because, you know, even though he did have surgery, like Nick Anderson was really good in like the 87 and a third innings he's pitched in his career. But, and you're right, he was his guy, but, you know, he's hurt too. So I think that makes it kind of an easy cut. I don't know why Ruthvik keeps hanging on to Willie Calhoun. I mean, I've been saying this for a while now. He's not, the upside just isn't there. It's not like he's young anymore, you know. Willie Calhoun is now 27. He's had 874 plate appearances. Like, yeah, he had a decent 2019 where he had 21 homers and 337 plate appearances, but that was 2 years ago now. I think at some point you just have to concede he's just not going to live up to the hype. I'm off of Willie Calhoun completely. Not that I was ever really on the Willie Calhoun hype train. I also, one thing I'll add about Ruthvik's team is I feel like he added all of these like little pitchers like late like in the season, and like little meaning like not like, you know, star guys, but like, you know, guys with like a little bit of upside. And I think they could pan out for him, but I think he has to be careful about which guys of those he keeps and which one of those end up being like cuts as the offseason keeps going on. Like I know Jose Suarez and Paul Sewald were guys that he kind of like threw out on the trade block but didn't really end up cutting. Like, I don't know if those guys are necessarily the right guys or if they're going to end up being the wrong guys. But, you know, I think they do have some upside. And Hunter Dozier, I think, should have been cut. He's just not that good. I don't really get the appeal of Hunter Dozier. He had like half a good season a couple of years ago, but that's it. One other decision I wanted to get your opinion on though. Ruthvik kept Keston Hiura. What do you do with Keston Hiura?
Ooh, I do not know. I mean, he was terrible this year. I was really high on him bouncing back coming into the year, and that did not come to fruition. I mean, he had 256 on base. That was even worse than I would have thought. He was in the minors for a lot of the year. I'm not I'm not sure. I think with this team maybe entering a rebuild, he's an okay guy to gamble on. But I'm not really sure if he would have been picked up because it was rough this year.
I think he could be picked up for the name alone, but like here, so he had 197 plate appearances this year. I think this one statistic sums it up nicely. Do you want to guess what his strikeout rate was?
35.
39.1%.
Oh my God.
And that's so he had 30.7 in 2019, 34.6 last year, and now it is at 39.1. So it is increasing.
Man.
This is like a Chris Davis like stat line. Like it's that bad. I mean, I think somebody might have picked him up for the name alone. And maybe gambled on him one more time because he's only going to be, or he's 20. He turned 25 during the season, but I think an underrated part of this too is he's only going to be first base eligible, and the threshold for being relevant at first base is a little higher than it is for second base. I think second base is not really that deep of a position this year in fantasy, whereas first base is a bit more deep. So, man, I don't know. But to your point about them maybe entering a rebuild, is that actually the case? Because if you're looking at what they did at the deadline, they went and they got Jose Barrios. So you now have Bieber, DeGrom, Barrios, and Logan Webb. That's a very good top 4-year rotation. They still have Acuna, Bregman, and Devers. So that's a great top 3 with the bat. 4 of those 5 missed significant time this year, which I think partially explains why they missed the playoffs. I mean, I disagree with a lot of the players that Ruth Vick ends up hanging on to, like guys like Keston Hiura, guys like Willie Calhoun. But I mean, I think the pieces are here to compete next year. I just think that, he needs to be a little more strategic about the type of guys that he gets. Because I mean, he is only a year removed from almost being a finals team.
Yeah, I guess it's maybe more of a retool than a rebuild.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot that this team is missing for sure. And he really needs some of his starters to be healthy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But I mean, I think he needs a little more rotation depth, and he has picked up some interesting guys that can maybe fill it out. But you're right, like it is concerning that with DeGrom and Bieber missing significant times this year, that he just kind of absolutely tanked his team. It's like his team was struggling even before Acuna, got hurt. So it wasn't just like the bat injuries necessarily, but like those two kind of tanked his rotation pretty quickly.
But the next team that's on our list to talk about is Bo with the Flow. They cut a few guys that aren't super surprising. They cut some relievers. Kendall Graven's a little surprising. Dylan Bundy. He was terrible this year, but maybe a little bit surprising to see that he's just not going to try and let him bounce back from it. Garrett Hampson, we have our bet with him. He was pretty bad this year. And JD Davis is another guy that he just wasn't able to find any sort of trade for. He was pretty good when healthy. He just missed time a lot this year. He was already on waivers once this season. So maybe it's not the most shocking, but really, I think he could be a good piece for a team once, if a team has room for him and if he stays healthy. But other than that, is there anything really worth talking about with him?
I don't think Davis was on waivers at any point, by the way. I think it was just how Eric processed a trade when I sent JD Davis to Clayton and Jake for Zach Eflin.
Gotcha, that must have been it.
And it's interesting because it took me a little while to decide whether or not I should do that trade, and now both of those players were cut at the cut deadline. Eflin, a guy I really like, but he's going to miss the start of the season with surgery. I think JD Davis has 2 problems. One, he can't stay healthy, but 2, he doesn't really have a defensive home. He probably needs to be more of a DH somewhere that plays in the field a little bit. But there were like legitimate like streaks he had last year where he looked like the best like offensive player for the Mets. I'm mildly surprised he was cut. And I only say mildly because Jake was shopping him for a little while after the season. And I do think he ends up on somebody's roster pretty quickly. Like, I think speculatively, he'd make a lot of sense on like EBO's roster, for example. Just with their emphasis on maybe rebuilding. I'm kind of surprised Andrew Heaney's still on his roster. And maybe I shouldn't, maybe I'd be more surprised if the Dodgers didn't sign him, but I think the Dodgers signing him pretty quickly, and all the reports are like, hey, maybe he's the next Robbie Ray, has maybe allowed him to get a little bit of a vote of confidence and you know, maybe made it worth hanging on to him. And I think that there's certainly some potential of Andrew Heaney, but you know me, I've always been ready to quit Andrew Heaney, and maybe I watched his 4 home run game against the Orioles, and I was just, you know, I think that did it in for me officially. But I can't get that out of my mind, even when I look at some of his numbers from the previous seasons and thought, like, hey, maybe there's something there. The other guy I'm surprised he didn't cut, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised, is Patrick Corbin. He had a 5.82 ERA and a 147 WHIP this year. And yeah, maybe you're like, hey, you know, he can bounce back. He's got the big name, but like, he's been legitimately bad for 2 seasons in a row now. I know it took me a while to cut him because I was kind of holding out hope, and maybe that makes me a little bit of a hypocrite. But I just, there's nothing in Patrick Corbin's profile right now that makes me think like, hey, here's the path for him kind of getting back and into it. I guess the one thing he has going for him is because of that contract, he's pretty much guaranteed a rotation spot for the next couple seasons. So he'll have some opportunities to work through it. But yeah, that's just pretty bad. And then offensively, I think he kept all the guys he should have. Yeah. Interesting that he only has 1 reliever on this roster now. I mean, it's a good one. It's Edwin Diaz, but that's something to keep an eye out for because he kept 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He kept 13 starting pitchers.
That's so many starting pitchers.
No, I know. I mean, like, I think 10 is like the most I'd like to keep. And I mean, I kind of get it. He kind of is a mentality I've had the past few off seasons before this one, when I've kind of like finally found a group of relievers I like, where it's like the relievers are replaceable. Keep somebody's starters, maybe extract some extra value from them in trades and stuff. But like, there's no way he opens the season with 13 starters on his roster. I think that there's some more trades coming down the pipeline for him, especially because I feel like he's seen a propensity to make some blockbusters.
They're definitely going to be some pitchers moved this offseason. And the next team on my list is your team. We've talked about pretty much everyone already. Maybe just a brief nod to Garrett Whitlock. He could be the Red Sox closer, you said?
Yeah, I think he could. He had a really solid year, sub-2 ERA. I was shocked that Ruthvik and Nick cut him in like August and was more than happy to scoop him up. Ruthvik claimed it was because he wasn't getting enough saves and holds, which he didn't this year. But I mean, he was really good. I think that role's coming. I ran out of roster space. And I think it's kind of in the same mold of a Kendall Graveman or a Dylan Floro, who were also cut. Like, hey, there's just some solid relievers that are going to get cut. And, you know, if people clear up roster space, maybe those are the types of guys that get picked back up. But, you know, unfortunately, you have to make some of those tough decisions. Side note on Graveman, I think Jake and Clayton should have kept Graveman over one of those starting pitchers I mentioned, because I think even if you want to go with the we can rebuild a bullpen strategy, I think it's nice to keep a guy or two through the offseason. And Graveman was a really good holds guy this year. So just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's true. He's fine. I'm maybe worried about him going forward. I don't expect him to have as good of a season as he did this year or anything.
Yeah. No, that's fair. But I think you know, he's not the worst guy to hang on to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but moving on, the Bellies cut pretty much all the people we thought they would, with the exception of Chris Flexen, was kind of a surprise, but we've talked about him. And then EBO is really the last team there is. They cut Tommy Pham, which is maybe one of the most surprising cuts already. He had a pretty good season, honestly. He had a 340 on base. He stole 14 bases. The power numbers weren't exactly there. He only slugged 384, but I think he's certainly rosterable. I'm interested in him, honestly. And they also cut Christian Vazquez, which was shocking because he did finish as the 10th ranked catcher. So I think he's certainly rosterable, especially for a team that currently has no catchers. I'm very shocked that they cut him. And Patrick Wisdom also had a really good season at the plate. But yeah, are you surprised by any of these people?
Yeah, let's start with Tommy Pham. So you and I had a conversation on this podcast when Eric cut Tommy Pham earlier in the year after trading for him. I actually talked to Eric about that afterwards, and Eric was like, look at the splits month by month. Let's pull these up here for a second. He started the season off like, let's see. So April was slow. He went off in May and then even more off in June. He had a 449 OBP, 625 slugging in June. He had a 307 OBP in July with 2 homers and 8 ribbies. So he had 9 of his homers and 22 of his ribbies between May and June. He had a 275 OBP in August with 2 homers and 5 ribbies. September, he had a 282 OBP with 2 homers and 9 ribbies. So, and he was losing playing time at that point too because of his struggle. So, like, you know, I think Tommy Pham should be on a roster, but I do, think that, he's just not that good. I mean, EBO picked him up kind of as a flyer at the end of the season, but like, I'm not exactly torn over the fact that he caught him.
Yeah, I feel like Tommy Pham is the type of guy that I hypothetically want. Like if I hear he's available, I'm like, yeah, Tommy Pham, I'd want him on my team, sure. And then I look closer, I'm like, and then I kind of get cold feet, and like, yeah, I don't really need him or anything. So he's kind of in that category, and maybe Jeff McNeil's kind of there too, honestly, or JD Davis or a couple of those other guys.
Talk about Jeff McNeil. I think Jeff McNeil just had a really bad season that's not really useful for fantasy. So I think he might be better in real life than in fantasy. The one thing that'll keep me going back to Pham is he had 14 stolen bases, and he does have that speed power combo. That's kind of hard to find. But he's going to be 33 or 34. So he is on the older side too. So can't really fit EBO's timeline. Who are the other big names you said? Christian Vazquez kind of had a down year. It doesn't really surprise me that they cut him. I think that they're going to get a catcher somewhere else. I think they smartly did what Ruthvik did, and when Ruthvik got Darno, and he's like, oh my God, I need a catcher, instead of just picking one up for the rest of the season when he knew he wasn't going to keep him. I think EBO is just going to actually wait for the right solution instead of forcing one. What were the other names you said?
The only other one I mentioned was Patrick Wisdom.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Wisdom was interesting. He had 28 homers, which was actually more than I thought. I chatted you that kind of surprised, but like, he's 30, kind of a journeyman. I mean, if somebody wants to pick him up, great, but like, that's not the type of guy I want to, gamble on. I'm fine with the fact that he didn't gamble on him. The CBO roster, I think, is going to be turned over quite a bit this offseason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is not the end of the moves that are going to be made. Certainly, especially for EBO and Jake's team, and maybe a couple others.
No, if there's one takeaway I had from all these roster cuts and kind of looking through these rosters now that we've kind of done a deeper dive with the cuts, it's that a lot of these teams still have holes, and I think a lot of these teams, well, maybe it's still a little early because it is mid-November here to like really have full agendas developed, and maybe it's different last year with COVID. We have more time now. It's like I think people are busier with their lives. They're starting to think through some of this now that we have these first wave of trades. I think we're going to see more people being like, hey, I have a specific call. There's this player I want to target. Let's go and get something done. And I think EBO kind of put that down now, being like, hey, here's a list of players I'm ready to trade to rebuild. And there's significant enough names where I think there's going to be some traction. So I don't think we're going to see this kind of quiet kind of period that we had seen. I don't know if it's going to come as fast as last year, but I think we're going to see some trades. And I'm excited for that.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. So we've been talking for a really long time. And it feels longer since we started recording at 5 instead of our usual 8 or 9. But is there anything else we want to talk about before we go?
One thing I'll just mention, when we were talking about Tavi Pham, I thought there was the potential for me to be able to announce a trade on air before we wrapped up, but that's not going to happen. But we'll see what's going to happen. I know there's at least one more deal I want to make, so I am excited. We will be doing power rankings next week. I think it's a good time now that everybody kind of has uniformly across the board 50 or 51 players on their roster, depending on whether or not you have somebody on your non-prospect inactive list. And I'm looking forward to it. Anything else you have to say before we wrap up this very long episode?
Nope, that's about it. Yeah, power rankings are next week, like you said. And it's going to be a busy off season for all of us. I'm glad it's kind of started to start, I guess.
Yeah.
No, gonna be great. Even with hockey being as active as ever, I'm having a ton of fun in that league. And yeah, we'll see you all next week.
Yep. See you then.
This podcast is good.